Hello there, Commonwealth from here. It's been heavily rumored that The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is getting a remake for the Switch too. While the prospect alone is exciting, there are many ways Nintendo can make this the best Switch 2 game, so let's go over all of it. But first be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press the notification bell. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is considered by many the best game in the series, if not the best game of all time. After all, it is the only 99 on Metacritic. It undoubtedly set the standard for 3D Zelda as a nearly perfect transition from 2D to 3D, surpassing even Super Mario 64. To this day, we can say revolutionized 3D gaming with its massive Hyrule field and intuitive lock-on system for combat. These mechanics have aged well for the most part, but if you're a new Zelda fan who started with the open-air games on the Switch, you can feel deal-breaking going back to the 3D Zelda games of old. A full-blown remake of Ocarina of Time, on the other hand, can break most, if not all, of those restrictions and bring this and then later games to a new life.
So how do you modernize and make Ocarina into potentially the best in the franchise again? The best combination and balance of traditional and modern Zelda. Like most games from the Nintendo 64 to the Wii generation, areas were not seamlessly connected. Instead, they were broken off by brief load times. This makes sense as the limited power of the Nintendo 64 and later 3DS couldn't handle processing an entire open world at once. But now we have the Nintendo Switch 2. And as demonstrated by the final editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, this system can handle the biggest maps in gaming history at upscaled 4K 60 FPS. One of these maps has 3 different layers and no visible loading between mountain ranges, villages, or simply going inside a building that isn't a shrine. I can't stress enough how crazy it was to enter a shop for the first time in Breath of the Wild with no loading. Even if Ocarina of Time's map doesn't change too much in this rumored remake, simply removing the loading between areas would be a huge improvement, making this Hyrule interconnected like never before. Just imagine no loading while entering Castletown from Hyrule Field and vice versa. And also riding through more of Hyrule all the way to the entrance of Goron City on Epona. A seamless experience across a map that could also see some changes to match the drawn one from 1998.
The only time loading might be necessary is when entering and exiting dungeons, just like the ones in Breath of the Wild. The dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom, however, fit seamlessly within the game's world, but the shrines were separated by loading screens. You know, like in Breath. Perhaps there's a way for Ocarina of Time's dungeons to fit seamlessly within Hyrule, which they in a way are, but we would still accept if they had to be separate from the open world. While we're on that subject, there were a few dungeons that didn't make it into the final game on the N64. It would be a neat bonus, or actually one required, to bring back at least one of these cut dungeons, now fully finished from beginning to end. But also, they have to work in a way that they don't ruin the pretty much perfect pacing of Ocarina of Time. The best way might be through a slight progression change in the main quest. Yes, with the Temple of Light coming at the very end, though before Ganon's castle. And that is by simply preventing Rauru from handing the Light Medallion right away to Adult Link after the 7 years. As for the cut Wind Temple, it could be an optional dungeon much like Link's Awakening DX and Switch Color Dungeon, where the prize at the end is something other than a medallion and not a part of the main quest, say a gameplay enhancing weapon or outfit.
Of course, we can't talk about an Ocarina of Time remake without mentioning the controls, as these would greatly benefit if they took a page out of Breath and Tears' playbook. Firstly, dual stick controls, being able to control the camera independently from movement. This change was made to Majora's Mask 3D on the new Nintendo 3DS, but Ocarina of Time 3D did not get this same update. We cannot stress enough what kind of wonders it would do for exploration, which would feel less restrictive and stiff, and rather more fluent, modern, and seamless. Even still, camera controls are only the beginning of what Ocarina of Time could take from the new open-air Zelda games, such as the fluid combat, where Link can parry with his shield and use a Flurry Rush counterattack on stunned enemies. That one might be skipped, but one that could see implementation is the inclusion of a jump button to a new generation of 3D Zelda remakes. Paragliding could be replaced by a Pocket Kuko, as you could already glide with them in Kakariko. The gameplay flow could also be improved with a radial quick select menu that lets you swap items with ease. Looking at you, Iron Boots in the Water Temple. Ocarina 3D already fixed it for handheld play in 3D, but our 4K TVs are still waiting. As for climbing, this is where it gets tricky, as being able to climb up any wall would destroy the game's strict progression system. We wouldn't be surprised if this ability does not appear in the Ocarina of Time remake, which is a shame, as it would be fun to use in Castletown.
Speaking of, the potential of adding more to the child section of Castletown in this remake is big. The reason is simple, as there's so much you can't explore in the original game compared to the actual walled map of the main settlement from 1998. In the original and 3DS remake, the angles were fixed, so we only saw what the game wanted us to, and there are so many alleyways and streets on the game's map that you to this day can't explore as a result. No question, all of this needs to be fully explorable, with no camera transitions when Link is walking the streets, alleys, and main square in the remake. Even if Link can't climb, there should be new ladders placed in key locations in Castletown to explore the capital from a vertical angle. Think Breath's Temple of Time before receiving the paraglider from King Rome in the tower. And all of these new areas could have fresh content to find within the hidden street corners of Castletown, which means it will be ripe for new side quests and minigames. This will also apply to the Castletown 7 years in the future, completely destroyed by Ganondorf's wrath, seeing the full scope of damage. You know, like we saw in Breath and in a way also in Tears. Only in this case, we would have actual redeads, which are far superior to Gyptos.
Let's move on to the game's presentation. Visuals, music, and since Breath and Tears, voice acting. Should this remake include it? Absolutely, but only the most important story moments. This is what happened in Breath and Tears, as the former was the first Zelda game ever to have voiced dialogue, although only in pre-rendered story cutscenes. The in-game ones stuck to the classic dialogue boxes, and this was repeated in Tears of the Kingdom, albeit with more voice lines. Ocarina of Time with fully voiced cutscenes would be very impactful and strike more emotion in the game's heartbreaking moments. It would also be in line with the vocal performance of Bo Bragason, the Princess Zelda in the live-action movie coming out in May 2027. Like Breath and Tears, however, the in-game conversations with NPCs would remain voiceless dialogue boxes, as it would take an extremely long time to get all these lines recorded by multiple voice actors. Plus, it could make Ocarina, well, less Ocarina, which is closely tied to music.
Since we're on that topic, it should be completely remastered with a live orchestra, as this is how Zelda soundtracks shine the brightest. Just look at the Zreo orchestrations of Ocarina. It is truly amazing. That said, there should be an option to use the original MIDI soundtrack, as most Ocarina of Time fans will want to hear that nostalgic music as they play this remake. There's just something about that low-resolution sound that can't be replicated, and also make it accessible to listen in a sound menu, a series first as well. But of course, a remake has to have significantly upgraded visuals. And no, it's not going to look anything like the Unreal Engine renders we have been showing you in this video. At least not exactly the same. Those were built for high-end PCs and will cause our Switch 2s to explode. Instead, it will look more refined from the original and 3D with that added Nintendo touch. The original Ocarina of Time was going for as realistic an art style as it could back in 1998. It wasn't as whimsical as something like Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, as most areas had low color saturation, and the backgrounds resemble locations that could easily be something taken from our own world. In fact, this and the medieval historical setting is what got me into this franchise as my first N64 experience. But with that said, in 2011 the 3DS remake favored a more animated aspect, brightening up the colors and giving characters bigger eyes.
So, Nintendo has two options for a new and respectful art style over 15 years after the last update. The first being an evolution of the realistic side continued by Twilight Princess and the Wii U tech demo from 2011, and the second a continuation of the animated style we saw in Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and the open air games. Given that we haven't seen a realistic take on Zelda since that Wii U tech demo, we're betting the Ocarina of Time remake will have similar visuals to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It won't look exactly like these games, but it will still share that anime inspiration. After all, the Zelda games with this art style are the best selling, and Nintendo is going to follow the money, unless they want to tie this closer to the previously mentioned Zelda movie. In fact, this might be a significant reason as to why this remake is being developed in the first place, to get newcomers who just watched or will watch the live-action movie into the series starting from the beginning. Okay, not the very beginning, but at least the most important point in the timeline, right before it branches off 3 separate ways and maybe turns into a rupee towards the current end. It might also hint that the movie is going to be similar plot-wise to Ocarina of Time, even if it isn't a one-to-one recreation of that story. So, while new Zelda fans could easily start with something like Breath or Tears, why not start with a bold, scratch that, best Nintendo remake of one of the most influential 3D games of all time? With that in mind, maybe the Ocarina of Time remake could have a more realistic art style to more closely match the tone of the live-action movie, while still maintaining a semblance of animated style. Even when we look back at Twilight Princess, it's not nearly as realistic as something like the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy and Resident Evil 2. Characters have exaggerated features that don't make them look like real humans, so a similar style can be repeated in the Ocarina of Time remake.
If Nintendo is following the methods we have laid out in this video of expanding and improving, but also preserving/conserving, the final remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in 4K could win up being the very best Nintendo Switch 2 game. But what do you think? Let us know what would be the best Ocarina for you in the comment section down below. And be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press notification bell if you enjoyed this video and want to be notified for new Zelda content from us. Last but not least, a big thanks to you for watching and to all patreon.com/commonrealm patrons. Special shoutouts go to our heroes, Cheryl, Garrett Hoy, Holly Wolf and Kintaro. All rock and please enjoy these awesome videos.